It's not about tax, though, so I'm letting the folks later.
Darn it.
So hello, everyone. My name is Treshock, and I'm IBM's Global Solution Leader for blockchain in healthcare and life sciences. And my talk is called The End of the Beginning. And that's an homage to a talk by Benedict Evans at Anderson Horowitz. And I encourage all of you to look that up and watch it online. He basically spoke about how the business models that have sustained our world now for 100 years are coming to an end. They've reached the maximum efficiency that they can get. And we're in a phase of transitioning to a new type of economy, one based around fluidity of information. This is also a little bit of a play on where we are in blockchain as well, where it's the end of the beginning of the first 10 years, let's say, of experimentation that we've been doing, trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. And I was encouraged by the panels yesterday because they're echoing many of the same points. How now we're experimenting with new models of governance and structuring and business to create networks that are sustainable and global. And I'm going to be telling this through a story. And these are broad concepts, but I'm going to be telling it through the context of healthcare, which is where I work, or the industry in which I work in. And I'm going to do it through a story called Data, A Tale of Two Cultures. Because in healthcare, the future relies on data. And I know every industry says that, but in healthcare it's really true. And the reason is this, because we're transitioning now from a world in which a pharmaceutical manufacturer will make one pill and sell it to 1 million people, to a world where treatments are customized and tailored for each of us. And this sounds like science fiction, but it's actually science fact. And the irony, though, is in this world where cures are made specific or individualized for each of us, to get there, we need data about all of us. We need data about all of us. And there's efforts underway to do that. And now I'm going to tell you a tale of two cultures, how two different cultures are grappling with this issue. The first is from China. This is a company called Ping An, which is a technical arm of a Chinese insurance company. And they built an online system or app to record an individual's medical history. We would think of it something like an EMR, electronic medical record system. Now, the app that they built, they issued a press release about 4 months ago that said, hey, we want to let you know we did data, the health data of 300 million people. 300 million. It's roughly the population of the United States. And the way they said this was, it's a big deal, but we're just getting started. We'll check in again at 500 million, then at 1 billion. Think about that for a moment. The health data of 1 billion people. The health data of 1 billion people, right? And in the context of this society, there's relatively few restrictions or limits on how that can be analyzed. And it can also be combined with other data, financial data, economic data. So they're creating an incredible data set. Now let's look at something going on in the US that you may have heard about. Project Nightingale, which is a collaboration between Google and Ascension, which is a healthcare provider. And they have the health data of roughly 25 to 30 million Americans. And IBM is doing this too, Microsoft is doing it, Amazon is doing it as well. We have far less rich data than Ping An does about far fewer people. Let's talk about though how this is viewed. In China, this is viewed as if they're cultivating a national asset. This is a national asset to them. Again, right or wrong, whether you agree with the approach or not, it's unquestionable that the health data of 1 billion people is a national asset. In the US, right, these projects, again, this one by Google, but there was an article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday about IBM and Microsoft and Amazon. These are viewed with scrutiny. These are viewed with scrutiny. The first questions that are raised are regarding individual privacy. Individual privacy and how the data is going to be used. And again, those are important questions. Those are important questions that need to be answered. But it's also important to set the context of what's going on in this world and what we're going to give up. So two very different approaches to this. Now, what we're trying to solve IBM and the people that are working with us, and many of us in this room, are how do we have our cake and eat it too? How in the West, there are countries that don't choose to follow a centralized model, can we bring together the data when we need it to do things that are meaningful for society, for our world, to advance the state of our art, while still respecting privacy, individual freedom, the ability to monetize this information. How can we do that? And this is what I mean when I say building blockchains for the 2030s. So information flows in the 2030s. Again, business is changing. Again, to echo this notion from Anderson Horowitz. Today, in our world today, information is viewed as an asset that's hoarded. It's shared very sparingly. Companies gain strategic advantage by building moats around themselves, by restricting the flow of information. You have information, you reach scale, you don't want to share that with anyone, because that gives something away. It's used to support what are typically linear business flows, things moving from right to left, or left to right in a process, moving one way in a process. The future is different. The 2030s are different. To get to what I'm talking about in personalized medicine or many other fields, the key to success is about information fluidity. The ability to have information flow bidirectionally when needed, supporting fully the privacy constraints that go along with that. To just give an example around personalized medicine again. Right, today, companies make a large number of pills and they warehouse them. In the future, that's a very traditional supply chain from left to right. In the future, for one of these personalized cures, which are working today, right, the process is a supply chain where n equals 1, where a physician would take a sample of a patient's blood, send it to a lab, the lab would do something to manipulate it. In the case of a CAR T therapy for cancer, they would weaponize an individual's T cells to fight that cancer. They'd send it back to the doctor who would inject it in that patient. It's a bidirectional supply chain. All of this has to be refrigerated. And if the samples get mixed up, if I get a drug that was meant for you, I'll die. And the consequences are great. This is not the way the supply chain works today. Supply chains of today cannot support this. So this is where we're going. And we step back, we've been working with companies now for a long time in this industry and others. And the question we're asking is, how do we build this? How do we build this now based on everything we've learned from doing blockchain for roughly 10 years? And we're going to start with the platform. We're going to start with the platform because we're IBM, and why not? Start from the inside out. And when we think about what would software need to do to support this, what are the characteristics it would have? It would have to be neutral. We've heard time and time again that this can't be owned by anyone. This can't be an IBM product. It can't be an SAP product. It can't be a Google product. I'll pick on them again. Right? It can't be owned by anyone because that gives anyone who owns it too much control. So it has to be neutral. It has to be robust, meaning that we're talking about, in this case, the supply chain for the world's pharmaceuticals. Right? There's a lot that needs to go into this. It needs to be battle-hardened and adept. And it needs to be fluid enough to change and adapt over time. So how do we do that? How do we do that? The way that we're doing it is by working with the Linux Foundation. So we are about to start an open source project with Linux to develop industry-specific software for the pharmaceutical industry. This will be open source. It will be built on Hyperledger and other open source components. Again, and it will be something that we all contribute to. IBM, SAP, Accenture, where do they go? Raise your hand. They're contributing. Everyone, the industry itself. Because again, for this to work, for all of us, it can't be owned by any of us. Now, we'll need to add some stuff to that. Even though this may be heresy, we can't do necessarily all of this with open source. So there will be some other components that get added on as well. And this will all be put in a container and made so it could run on infrastructure. In this case, I say compliant infrastructure because in industries like health, there are regulatory things that we need to account for. So now we have the platform, we have the software. What do we do with it? And the analogy we use here is that we're creating something like a toll road or an airport. If you think about someone like UPS and someone like FedEx, they compete vigorously. It's probably a polite way of putting it, but they don't build their own roads. United Airlines and British Airways, the same thing, but they don't build their own airports. They share a platform of common infrastructure. How can we create that here? Now that we have the software, and software hopefully everybody can agree to, how do we make that manifest? How do we run it? And what are some of the characteristics of an entity that would do that? So this is something that was discussed yesterday. And one of the key concepts that I'll echo here is accountability. This may seem like a centralized entity, but what we need is an entity that's accountable. And I'll echo another concept of minimum viable governance, or minimum viable entity. There needs to be an organization that pulls this together. In the context of the toll road or the airport, there needs to be somebody that runs the airport. Right? Airports aren't just chaos that's sort of self-organized. Toll roads don't just run themselves. In the case of pharmaceuticals, you need to make sure that only legitimate actors participate in this. So we're creating an entity. This entity will be transparent. Its activities will be owned or made clear to everyone. It will be constrained. What do I mean by that? That this will be a not-for-profit or a profit-constrained corporation. So this will be set up as something independent from all of us, similar to the way the WEF structured Gavi, the Alliance to Do Pharmaceuticals. Be independent from all of us. It will be constrained in how much money it can make. So its primary motivation is not profit-seeking, but operating this infrastructure. And it will be stable. And this is important for two reasons. One, because we want to allow external capital participation in this. We don't want this to be funded entirely by industry or by companies like IBM. And if we could create an entity that has a stable cash flow, again, think a public utility or an airport, we could attract external investors. And we're already in discussions to do that. And the second point of stability, one thing that we've also heard over the years is that companies are worried about relying on blockchain for their data because they're worried about what happens to this 5 years from now or 10 years from now. Particularly in something like this, which there are regulatory considerations to be had. So one way that we're going to ensure that is to create an endowment, either in the form of cash in the bank or in the form of insurance. And what that meant is, think of it as business continuity insurance. And what that would allow for is if this entity can no longer function profitably as an ongoing business, this endowment would ensure that the data is available and the applications can still function for, in the case of life sciences, 10 years. So if you're a drug company like Pfizer or Merck, or you're a dispenser, a pharmacy like CVS, you'll know that even if this goes out of business, you will be able to do what you need to do for 10 years from any point while we figure out what to do with it. And with those considerations in mind, now we have the airport. Let's do something interesting with it. So we're going to build applications on top of this. And when I say we, I mean we, all of us. So again, not just IBM. This is a platform now that's open to anyone who has a legitimate reason to be here. And these applications, they need to be compliant. And what I mean by that is they need to respect the privacy constraints that are put on the data that's underlying this, and there will be structural ways that we can enforce that. But then beyond that, we're going to town. These things need to be transformational. This is how we change the world, by doing this. And this, we hope, is the formula that could work in life sciences, in healthcare, and for many other industries. And we're actually doing it. So going back to the example where I started, personal health information and how it's being collected, we see healthcare breaking down into 3 networks that are interconnected and can interoperate, but inherently there's some reasons why we build them and manage them separately. The network of value IBM calls the Health Utility Network. And this is something that we started last year in collaboration with, I think, 6 other companies. And there'll be an update on that at HIMSS this year in March. The network of goods is a supply chain network that we call the Pharmaceutical Utility Network. So we have the Health Utility Network and the Pharmaceutical Utility Network, HUN and FUN. And that's what happens when people like me do marketing. And that is kicking off now. It's going to build on the pilot we just completed with the FDA, with Merck and Walmart and KPMG. The network of data we've been talking about at WEF in some of the WEF sessions about how deeply personal data, healthcare data, genomic data, can be used to tailor products and services to people in the world, right? And how we can manage the privacy considerations around that. And I know you're all wondering, and we did not call that done the data utility network, because the marketing team got to me ahead of time. So this is the journey that we're on. And the Pharmaceutical Utility Network, again, that's something that we're kicking off now. And we're partnered with a number of entities, right? Also including Microsoft. We hope to be finalizing the details of our open source project with the Linux Foundation soon, and then incorporating the work the WEF is doing into this as well, to leverage their learnings. And its purpose, again, is to rewire how the supply chain works, how the pharmaceutical supply chain works. And this will focus on applications that concern themselves with supply chain integrity at the most base level. Are the drugs we're taking safe? Drugs now are made all over the world. The ingredients for them come from all over the world. They're distributed all over the world. And that's the stuff that gets us going. But the real reason we're doing this is to get us to this personalized supply chain, where N equals 1, to help us all realize the promise in the 2030s of personalized medicine. I'm going to skip that. I just want to say that this will be hard. There's no doubt that this will be hard. But keep in mind, as you think about this, that if we do what's hard, we will get to the stars. And the question to ask, and the only question to ask, is will you join us on this trip? And with that, I say thank you. And we'll entertain any questions you may have. Any questions? I'm aligned if I don't let go a little bit. Yes, sir.
The question in all of the collaboration space, would you like
Thanks. No, I'm Chris Justice with Block Solutions. I think the question with all of these sort of collaborative initiatives, whether it's digital identity, healthcare, so many areas of that will touch financial services, AML, KYC information. The question is kind of, at the end of the day, how do we protect the data? How do we make sure that it's not only secured today, but also secured over time, as well as being easy to share? If you put something in a centralized data storage format, you create the honeypot. How do you avoid the honeypot?
Right. In the case of the network we were just talking about, the one around data, where personal data could be used to customize products, there our concept is that the data, when an individual gives consent, let's say share their genomic data, that is brought into a temporary container that's created for this analysis. Because that consent is immutably recorded on the blockchain, it comes with a key to unlock that data. Also going into that temporary container is the algorithm to analyze the data. And these two things are interconnected because an individual will share their consent to have their data analyzed in a specific way at a specific time. I will share my DNA in order to get better recommendations on candidates and make it myself. The analysis is conducted, and the only thing that comes out of that container is the answer and some metadata that will help us with learning and assurance that the AI algorithms aren't going awry in some way. And then that container and everything in it is destroyed. It's destroyed. So what we're doing by this is eliminating the orphan copies, right? Because many of the data, because right now many of the structures that we have to protect privacy, they're contractual, but they're not structural, meaning I give my consent to share my data to do X, Y, and Z. There's a legal contract around that. But there's nothing structural that prevents a nefarious actor from taking that data or a hacker from entering that company and stealing the data. Right? And then years from now, all my DNA is on Facebook. Right? This tries to tackle that by creating a structural mechanism that greatly limits the number of these orphan copies of individuals' data. And blockchain is used as a central part of that, but it's not the only piece of the story. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, partly. I mean, the whole idea of making sure that we eliminate the orphan data is critical across all of these applications, for sure. There's still the issue of, I guess, where do you still store that original genome data, right?
Yeah.
And make sure that that's protected and shared. And individuals are not generally the best at securing their own data storage vaults. So how do you know, what kind of frameworks do we need to come up, whether it's in a decentralized or distributed way, people are having some place to more securely store copies of this really important data that no one else can get to except for themselves because they have their private key.
Yeah.
It's a public good almost, right?
It is a public good. It is a public good. And you can see something like DNA being stored in, perhaps that's not stored in a distributed database, that's stored in a central database. But the only way to access it is by giving consent through this blockchain-enabled process. It's very specific and very unique. So I completely agree there's no way to absolutely ensure the data other than not to put it somewhere. But what we're trying to do is limit the number of attack vectors that can be used against them. And we welcome all of your results on how to better do that.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Hi, Sandra here at GPC. I have a question for you.
Please.
There are several other pharmaceutical supply chain groups that have announced, and Amazon has also hired an army of people. I don't know what they're doing, but obviously they said they're tackling the pharmaceutical supply chain. So how are you going to knit together communities that are already in play, plus maybe some behemoths like Amazon?
It's easy. We asked them to join us.
And?
We asked them to join us, and Chris and I, Chris, raise your hand, we were called, I won't say by who, by the CEO of one of these companies, we were called communists, which having an MBA, and always thinking of myself as being sort of
wow.
the seal of capitalism. We called communist by an executive who was phenomenal. So again, it's our theory here that we all win if we could all create a platform. And this is AOL versus the internet. Right? I'm old, so I used to use AOL, I used to dial into that. So you could chat and shop and do silly little things all in the AOL universe. And then the internet came along. Right? And you were able to chat with Gap or shop in Amazon and do all these things outside of AOL's walled garden, and AOL went out of business. And we think that model is applicable here. The message is platforms always win. Platforms always win. And that's not to say that IBM's platform wins. So platforms always win. And history shows that you should be on the right side of that. And we are having a very frank exchange of views with some of these companies. Some have agreed with our approach, some haven't. We will let history play their out.
Yeah, so I used to work for a company which is CMS, Center for Medicare Medicine, contractor, and we kind of trying to do it during the Obama administration. It has a meaningful use of EHR record.
Yes.
And the whole NH, like the private data, you need a consent.
Yes.
Doing the consent management. So we have some limited success. Also, we build some IT system around it, and have some testing with OMC. I don't know what's the situation in terms of the government funding for this kind of initiative. That's really the whole industry should be going in the healthcare. I really enjoy it. You have three kind of network interconnected. If you go back to this slide, You have the value, you have data, you have the goods. It's all kind of associated with the whole ecosystem. But the government, do you guys talk with the government or CMS?
We have, and we do, yeah. Yeah, and they are, the regulators are very supportive of this. They don't fund these initiatives right now. We are in close coordination with them. The FDA in particular around the blockchain that we're building for the pharmaceutical supply chain, because they are very concerned and interested in how to speed up the process of something like drug recalls, for example, right? How to make that quicker. And they are, you know, they are a partner.
One more question is, like, if this is the real challenge is for the blockchain is really to get reliable and trustful data, has not been tampered with, right? Those data are on the blockchain, then you can deal with it. Otherwise, it's a garbage in, garbage out. Is there any approach in this healthcare industry? And the approach, like I know in the financial industry, you kind of an oracle, like in DeFi, right? The oracle like Qingling, this type of solution. Or in some of the IoT industry, you can have secure element or TEE, this kind of construct. And in some other area, you can leverage the AI or machine learning to kind of have a fraud detection or counterfeit detection, or prevention, this kind of measurement, or some of the things which have unique physical properties, then you can also on-tune. So is there other things, particularly to healthcare, to make sure the data you get from the physical world on-chain is like has a one-to-one relationship?
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons we need this entity for accountability to set the rules around that. In the case of healthcare, the entities that we want on this blockchain are known and trusted, right? So if I'm a healthcare provider in a hospital system, right? I'm a known entity and agreeing to participate in this blockchain. And there's a set of procedures to onboard me into this. And this is why you need this entity to govern that process. Now, as a participant in this blockchain, I agree my attestation is the data I put on the blockchain I will stand behind fully and legally, right? So this is a system of truth, right, that sits above the system of record. Now, you can't completely guarantee that everything will be 100% accurate.